Just did a video on undrafted free agents from this class where I talk more about the hit rates, and again, you can search the channel on my database or any of my Twitter about hit rates, or just ask me anytime. I have those pretty well queued up. Essentially, players drafted 4th round to undrafted free agents, we get about 2 every year, have at least one top 24 season at wide receiver, or one top 12 season at tight end, and running back top 24 again. Hopefully that made some sort of sense to you. We do get fantasy relevant player from these rounds. In fact, they account for about 22 to 27% of fantasy relevant seasons since 2009, and this rate is fairly consistent, and it's proportional to those that are hitting at the top of the draft class as well. So we've seen somewhat of a drop-off despite Amon-Ra St. Brown happening in 2022, but since 2008 we've seen a lack of 2 players hitting from every draft class inside the first 3 rounds inside the top 36 overall. Again, Calvin Ridley has some injuries, and we had some other issues and context producing that. But undrafted free agents, or 4th round to undrafted free agents, as I tend to include in one group because the rounds 5 to 7 pretty much just role special team players, and not where the NFL is speculating on players that are going to take on roles that we ultimately like for fantasy, do account for a significant percentage of seasons. Now, because there's more of them, they're often side-eyed, lower drafted players. The fact that fewer people are interested in your leagues, in my leagues, in all leagues, in these players, and they're still accounting for around 22 to 27% of fantasy relevant seasons, depending on the position you're looking at. 33% at running back, by the way, since 2009. That makes them interesting to me, and also it's just fun. So at the running back position, players drafted 4th round to the 7th round actually hit at a fairly higher rate than most of the positions, so we're going to start there. Now, the obvious name is Isaiah Spiller. He fell, perhaps, to the 4th round in the NFL draft, when most of us, or I think a lot of people, myself included, had him included in the top 3 overall of our pre-draft ranks. Now, some of that has to do with the fact the NFL cares about the combine, whether I or you do, and I don't, by the way, and some of it just has to do with the NFL telling us something of what they feel about this running back class, and also their need for running backs, presumably. But Isaiah Spiller was still very productive in college. It's a sterling gold pre-draft score relative to this class, at least, and even his post-draft score, adjusted for 4th round draft capital, because that's what I adjust it for, obviously post-draft, is still actually pretty decent. Now, there's a lower floor, there's a higher chance he's a role player, and again, players drafted outside those first 3 rounds, even in fantasy, not just in the NFL, although it definitely exists in the NFL as well, tend to carry a stain or a stink or a I don't like it sense to them, both for the NFL and also for fantasy players, in that we have harder time increasing their value. Austin Ekeler can be a top 12 running back all he likes. He's never going to be talked about in the conversation with Dalvin Cook or Joe Mixon, even though he should be most of the time, because he was an undrafted free agent. Now, Isaiah Spiller's the easy name on this list, but I want to talk to you, I want to mention someone else, just because Isaiah Spiller is well known. You should be drafting him in the 2nd round of your rookie draft special. So the guy I'm going to mention, well, there's a lot. In fact, Keontae Ingram, Zach Reed likes a lot, Pierre Strong, Anthony Amico likes a lot, and so they're both on my radar, especially because of the landing spots they fell into. But the guy that sticks out to me the most is actually probably Tyler Badie. He's another person like Isaiah Spiller, I think, ultimately was just overlooked in the draft, because not only is he coming from a lower program and had less hype than Isaiah Spiller, but also because he fell down somewhat at the combine and the size measurements. He's a smaller running back, and he's not the athletic freak we would like to see, like an Austin Ekeler. But I do think he was incredibly productive in college. He's gone to the Baltimore Ravens, which is a heavily rushing team and seems to be inclined to redirect itself back to the rushing game in 2022. And he's a running back, and we roster running back in Dynasty. Now, the upside here is probably Myles Gaskin, which has been somewhat disappointing, but there were value increases and there were fantasy relevant startable games. And so, yeah, Tyler Badie is the guy I'm going to mention, the running back position drafted outside the first 3 rounds. Yeah. Okay, so next I want to talk about the tight end position. Again, outside the first 3 rounds in the NFL draft, we do get fantasy relevant tight ends. In fact, some of the most relevant. The one strong ingredient of a fantasy relevant tight end is that they're weird. Unfortunately, this year at tight end, tight end is one of those positions, is the position where we should still be paying heavy attention to their combine and athleticism, because it's one of the few things, and definitely one of the few places where it really seems to matter in the NFL for fantasy relevance. Unfortunately, this year almost everyone refused to do the combine, and tight ends in particular, barely any of them even ran the 40, let alone did any of the other drills. And so we don't really have that information outside of let's go ask someone who watches tape. Guy athletic, and I think the name that's going to stand out to everyone, because he was the most productive. He had an amazing pre-draft score in terms of his overall production compared to past fantasy relevant tight ends. But again, remember the key signal here is that he normally look weird. Is Isaiah Likely? I like where you're on. Baltimore loves tight ends. It's trying to reorientate itself back to the running back game. I really think for 2022, and Isaiah Likely fits that mold. Now, Mark Andrews is still the dude, but Baltimore has shown a consistent desire to have more than one tight end relative on the relevant on that depth chart. Will Isaiah Likely eventually blossom into like the Mark Andrews B? Probably not. But I think his landing spot's interesting. He was very productive in college. Read my pre-draft or post-draft notes for more information about that, because I can't keep making these videos 30 minutes long. And he's the most likely name. The guy I want to mention is actually called Cole Turner, drafted in the 5th round to Washington. Yeah, a lot less exciting, isn't it? But he was drafted below Cade Otton, who I think is going to get more kind of sleeper appeal, who went to Tampa Bay, and, you know, Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady, and also he was slightly more hyped up pre-draft as well. Cole Turner is not someone I've heard anything about before, but he had 2 years with 600 plus receiving yards, which doesn't sound positive, but they're his only 2 years. Tight ends are usually weird, remember that. He did have a 20% plus dominator as a tight end. That's not insignificant both of those years. At age 20 and 21, so he's a slightly older prospect. His yards per team passing attempt, because it's tight end, was actually slightly better than Cade Otton, who I do think is going to get slightly higher ADP and slightly more drafted and slightly more interest, even in tight end premium 2 tight end leagues. But honestly, Cole Turner kind of outproduced him. They outproduced him probably at a worse conference, and he has even a round less draft capital probably matters here. But I do think he was a very interesting producer who played 2 years and immediately had 600 receiving yards at an older age, which, again, is not as black a mark as it would be for running back or especially for wide receiver, because some tight ends do that. Jimmy Graham literally walked on as a tight end in college for 1 year, went to the NFL and became Jimmy Graham. Very few are Kyle Pitts that play 3 years, or Mark Andrews are highly productive, get drafted well. Mark Andrews fell a little bit in the NFL draft and then go on to have a successful career. Even Travis Kelce is a little weird because he did that and then had this delayed breakout until his 3rd year. Tight ends can do that, but it was still a little delayed with Travis Kelce, which is a weirder thing. Wide receiver position, my favorite position. The 4th round pick this year that I heard mention of and actually has my best pre-draft score from the 2022 class was actually someone, Zach Reed of the Dynasty Dummies, again mentioned to me, called Erik Ezukanma. But that's his name, you can see it on the screen. I just suck at words and stuff. So he's actually the most productive player, drafted 4th round to 7th round. Positive film notes, I think he's very much a specialty player from the way Zach described it. Not an all-round player, just a player with a decent speed that definitely knows his job in that role. He's going to Miami, which has got a lot of speed and playmaking ability though, and so that's not the guy I'm going to highlight, but I did want to mention that Zach Reed has highlighted him. He has the highest draft capital of anyone in this group that I'm interested in. And yeah, he had my highest pre-draft model score, so I should probably be more interested in him. I'm just not. I like volume. The player that stands out to me is a 5th round pick called Khalil Shakir. Now, I'm well aware that he's not unknown. I think he's been mentioned by some actual real names in our little thing that we do, that we sometimes call an industry. I don't like the Buffalo landing spot, but I don't hate the Buffalo landing spot. As I've talked about in some other videos, at least it's a productive team, and I think that's the most positive thing we can say about a landing spot. Ultimately, as much as we know about landing spot, a team being able to produce is a helpful thing to a player. Having said that, some players seem to make the team productive, So landing spot is a nightmare. But if I'm looking for a positive thing, looking for a good landing spot, ultimately I'm looking for a team that passes the ball, especially if it's a receiver, a significant amount of time, doesn't show any sign of slowing down in that department, and also can move the ball down the field with its other weapons that help breed more and more valuable opportunities. And I think Khalil Shakir going to Buffalo in the 5th round does that. Again, he's a player I would draft late 2nd round if I was the only person in the draft. I've drafted him once this offseason. It was in the 3rd round in a very deep draft where a lot of my other sleepers are already gone. I don't think you have to draft him in most rookie drafts, even in the 3rd round, but he's definitely someone I want to put on your radar. If I hear positive news about him this offseason, like with everyone that I've mentioned across these 3 positions, it will be the 2nd. Actually, for Khalil Shakir, it'll be the 3rd thing that will have inclined me towards rostering him, let's put it that way, because not only was his production profile, when I broke it down, his overall pre-draft score was below average, to be honest with you, but when I broke his actual production down, I actually quite liked it. What I actually read was he was a late bloomer who maybe getting a lower score because of the Calvin Ridley fallacy in that he started late, and so he doesn't get all of those extra points for playing at age 18, 19, and 20, although he did play at 20, but ultimately he was decently productive at Boise State, and I thought his pre-draft score might be somewhat muted by the fact that he started playing later. Anyway, those are my 4th round to undrafted free agents that I'm keeping an eye on. Let's say it that way. Some I will draft in the 3rd round. Most I will just be looking for positive news this offseason, especially if they drop out of the rookie drafts, which they are going to in plenty of rookie drafts. And there are other interesting players in that range, but those are a few names that I have liked and tagged for watching, as it were, that I don't hear as much about. Some of them I hear some things about, very few of them I hear much about. So yeah, thought I'd throw them out to you. Let me know what you think. Check out the database. Take some of the sweet data, or don't. Data isn't for everyone. Sometimes you just want to hear a nerd talk about his data, and I'm here for that too. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye.